Hey everybody, it's your friend Adam. I'm here, man. Am I really going to call you loser through this whole conversation?
It's Losar, but
A Lozar? Okay, you got to
like
do
it's
something about that branding, man.
it's an acronym. I've had it for years, so I just didn't change it. At a certain time, it's just like, oh, whatever, call me whatever.
Lo- Loser. No. You know that thing about how God, I don't even I don't know if this study is correct, but they say, names affect people.
hmm
Like if your name is Ernest, you're less likely to lie to people. Do you know that? Have
Yeah,
you have you seen this study? If your name is Lawrence, you're more likely to go into law, stuff like that.
yeah. They actually had a couple of studies like that where they went to like different names in different areas and different ethnicities and stuff.
Hmm.
So they tried to match up how it would work, and like it's actually interesting depending on the country how the
Yeah.
names change and how far you go with them.
Well, that's why I'm saying you gotta do something about that name. I
Now,
think winner would be more
well, on Twitter, I'm dialogue always.
right.
So, but yeah, on everything else, I just got to change it away from Losar.
So let's give people the backstory. I titled the stream "You're one of my critics on the left" because every time I tweet, you seem to respond in a sniping kind of way. So I feel like you are a critic, but you contested that before we started the stream. So let's. I
Well,
don't necessarily know what we're going to talk about. I just know that you asked to have this conversation, and I obliged just because I frankly enjoy talking to critics more because gives us some room to run, right?
yeah. Um, I'm I kind of just comment on things that I see on
Hmm.
Twitter, and yours pops up a little more than others for some strange reason. Like
Hmm.
for some reason, my feed, no matter even if I put it like the earliest first, like certain people, you Sean's another one where it's just like no matter what time it was posted, it seemed to be like the first one up. So if I'll flip my phone over and I'll see something, I'm like, oh, I disagree with this, and I'll write a response.
Hmm.
But I remember we were having a conversation about black crime, and I remember you having a couple of questions for me, and halfway through the conversation, it kind of got sidetracked,
Hmm.
and we ended up like debating other people and stuff. So I never really got a chance to explain black crime in America.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I was just like, well, let's just sit down and talk about it. And then maybe you'll understand, I guess, my perspective a little more.
Sure. I'm down. I'm totally down. I got to tell you, I don't know much about this topic just because I haven't really dug in. I have my own intuitions about it, but I don't know that I have I can debate you on the topic or anything like that. So I'm gonna have to take your word on a lot of the stuff you're gonna say.
And honestly, this is just a conversation. The only reason why I was doing like debate me is that I like to pick with
Hmm.
I like to pick with some people because I remember like a few years back where there was this thing where every time a leftist said something, somebody would pop up and be like, "Debate me, bro! Debate me, bro! Debate me, bro!" And like the left won't debate, so I would go around and be like, "All right, then debate," and like just to pick with people. But I am more than happy with just having a regular conversation too.
Yeah, that's another exchange that we've had recently because there is some kerfuffle about people on the left not wanting to debate people on the right and people on the right not wanting to debate people on the left. I think uh, on Twitter we were talking about James Lindsay turning people down for debates and also Vosh turning people down for debates
Yeah,
and Jake of Hannah and Jake turning people down for debates. So do you the thing though, there's a difference there that I'd like to point out. There I do think that there is something to the idea that it's pointless to debate somebody who's coming to the debate in bad faith. I think that's kind of the metric that is kind of brushed aside. Some people will say, like, this person doesn't know the topic, or this person, doesn't have the academic cred for me to debate them because there's a status differential. I don't think that's as important as considering whether or not the person is actually there for an honest discussion. Do you have a take on that?
And I agree, but it's inconsistent, and not yours personally, but just so when it used to be the right after the left, like there will be certain people, just to mention a couple of names, like Sargon or what is his name? I Hypocrite, or people like that would go, hey, debate me, to people like bigger name leftists, and the bigger name leftists would look over at their channels and see Sargon's videos not exactly being the same as Sargon in a conversation. And so they'd go, okay, and they'd say the same thing you're saying, where it's like, well, I don't see good faith here. So when they would say it, then it would be this whole rash of people going, oh, you're in bad faith, or not you're in bad faith. Oh, you don't want to debate. You're scared to debate. You're scared to get pwned, bro. And after seeing that so much, I started laughing and saying, hey, well, you know what? If this is just about the conversation, if this is there's a couple of leftists that have popped up recently who are more than happy to debate and who I think would be in good faith. So I would say, hey, how about this person? How about this person? How about this person? Because I know that I'm not a channel. I'm not anybody. I'm too small. But I know certain people who actually enjoy debate. And so when I started seeing excuses being made, that's when I started putting parallels together. Like, we've gone full circle. Like, there's now leftists saying, hey, let's debate. Now there's not exactly right wingers, but people who defend the right trying to make excuses. And that's what I usually pick with people about. But for the most part, I'm more than happy than just to have a conversation about.
Yeah, totally. I went into that first debate with Vosh and Sargon. I was just moderating, and I kind of helped set it up because it just wasn't happening between them. Like, I basically sent them both emails and said, here, you guys work it out. That for some reason it wasn't being worked out. And that debate was kind of a mess. And after that, I kind of came to the realization that I just didn't want to be in messy debates like that. Like, right now, the only one that I really have I don't really want to talk to thing going is Jangles, who I saw the debate with Jangles and Milo Yiannopoulos, and it was so bad faith on his part. There's even another channel, Book Smarts, who reviewed that debate, and Book Smarts is on the left, and he called Jangles bad faith all the way through that. So I don't know if it seems apparent that you're bad faith even from your own side, then why are you even debating?
I think that's because, like I said before, people like Milo, people like Sargon, they have a tendency to not be the same person in the debate that they are in their videos or on their live streams. So
what does that mean? Can you be more specific? Because I don't necessarily understand. Like, if you have a conversation, like, I don't think Vosh right now is basically slandering Sargon by calling him an ethno-nationalist, which is completely disgusting in my eyes. Well, I don't know how you could do that. Sargon doesn't have any videos that are strongly ethno-nationalist. He's debated ethno-nationalists. He famously debated both Richard Spencer and another, I can't remember his name, but PSA Sitch did a video on it. Another outspoken ethno-nationalist, and he's opposite. He's arguing against them. He's debating the other side of the topic, which is the anti-ethno-national position.
Well, I think, and I can't speak for Vosh, but I think he explains why he calls people certain things, like he'll call somebody a Nazi or call somebody an ethno-nationalist.
But do you believe his explanation though? Because it seems like he's just doing it to destroy their reputation.
Not really. But I will always keep myself to a point where I don't like making any claims like that, even a Richard Spencer.
Yeah.
Like, if you look up at Richard Spencer and you say, well, you're a racist, without really explaining what you see in Richard Spencer, it's very easy for someone to go, well, okay, Richard Spencer's not a racist because I've never seen him burn a cross in front of a black person's house while lynching people. You know, you can always move the goalpost on what you see as racist to keep somebody out of, or sexist or anything like that, to keep somebody out of there. So I feel like any conversation of trying to be like, oh, okay, Sargon's an ethno-nationalist, here's why, I think we'll both talk past each other because we both have a very different idea of what an ethno-nationalist is, or how an ethno-nationalist will present themselves in society. So
is it fair? Is it fair though to target people with a claim that you know is designed to get them deplatformed?
No.
We agree though.
But I will say I will always put a but on it. But I do believe that it is fair to point out where there is a discrepancy in how a person addresses both sides. So if you start noticing a pattern of, okay, somebody will do something incredibly horrible on one side, and then somebody will do something equally horrible on another side, and a person is constantly finding loopholes for the person on the other side and constantly finding excuses not to call out the person on that side, but then on the other side, but then somebody on the other side does something and you're like, okay, this is the most horrible thing in the world, this is why we have to destroy this thing. You might not be an ethno-nationalist, but you're definitely creating a shield for ethno-nationalists. So I can't call Sargon an ethno-nationalist because there's nothing that he said or done that makes him an ethno-nationalist, but he has a history of creating shields that ethno-nationalists hide behind.
So can you give an example?
So there was a video a while back where Sargon presented an argument about this topic, black crime, where he posted a video of Tim Wise explaining some of the reasons for black crime or some of the reasons for discrepancies in the black community. And he edited it to where it sounded like Tim Wise was saying it's white people's fault. And on the other side, when someone like before we found out that Richard Spencer finally got to the point of where it's like, okay, this is undeniable where he stands.
The tape came out. Are you talking about the tape with Richard Spencer? I was going to say also, people in the chat have said, you know, Richard Spencer obviously like calls himself. Well, he doesn't call himself a racist. He does call himself an ethno-nationalist, and he does, you know.
Yes, and he does now, and that was kind of the point. At the time of him doing that to Tim Wise, a lot of people on the left were going, "This is an obvious ethno-nationalist." This was years before.
Are we talking about Richard Spencer? Or are you talking about Sargon?
I'm talking about Richard Spencer.
Okay, yeah.
This is an obvious ethno-nationalist. He is like we can genuinely see that he's saying everything up to forceful, violent relocation of minorities in almost every conversation he's having. But there seems to constantly be a benefit of the doubt for him, all the way until finally he just blatantly admitted it, and no one had really any reason to defend him. Then all of a sudden there was this giant shift to, oh, we always thought that he was a ethno-nationalist. We always thought he was a, and that's where I can see somebody like Vosh. Now I don't agree with it, but I can see somebody like Vosh saying, okay, so for X amount of time you have been defending this person and literally placing him under your shield of everything anybody says will be labeled racist. Oh my gosh, look at how even Richard Spencer's being called racist, when it's like either you were not paying attention to what he was saying the whole time, or you blinded yourself.
Well, but this can be, there can be a number of false positives that are taking place, and you never get the defining evidence because that person in fact is not a secret racist. That's the problem with the whole secret racist narrative. Like, yes,
sure, but
you look like a genius when the tape comes out of Richard Spencer castigating Jewish people and everyone goes, oh, we knew it all along. But then there's other people that you're openly accusing of racism, Sargon for one of them, that tape is never going to surface because Sargon is not racist. Like, he's not privately engaging in that kind of behavior.
And that definitely works if we are talking about a person that doesn't do that to the left on a constant basis. But with Sargon,
hold on, what do you mean?
So
doesn't do what to the left on a constant basis?
For example, he's very quick as to finding certain leftists and instantly calling them communist, or instantly drawing.
It's a huge distinction, though. I have to make this clear. If you call somebody a communist, they're likely going to get promoted at the New York Times. Okay. If you call someone an ethno-nationalist, they're going to lose their Patreon. It's not even comparable. It's like it's fighting with it's like fighting with a squirt gun compared to fighting with an automatic weapon.
It is extremely rare that someone was just called something, and just because they were called something, they were removed. Now, there's usually something behind them, and we can argue whether or not it's valid. But in most cases, there's something that somebody's saying, okay, this is the final straw. It's very rare somebody just randomly showed up and they went, oh no, you're a racist, and they went, okay, well, we don't have any evidence of racism, let's remove this person. That is extremely rare. Extremely rare.
So your point is that you can call people ethno-nationalists all willy-nilly,
I don't think
regardless of whether. Okay.
Well, no, because I said in the beginning, I don't think anybody should ever be labeled like that. I think it should always be, this is this person's behavior, and this is why I disagree with that person's behavior. Right. That's where I, if you've noticed in every one of my responses to anyone, it's, this is what you're saying, and this is why I disagree with it.
Right.
So I don't agree with the idea of blanket calling people anything, even if you are pretty sure that they are that thing. But when I'm noticing on one side, there seems to be an acceptance of, well, okay, for example, very recently, Demi Lovato decided to just say, hey, I'm coming out as non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
Now, everyone could have just ignored it. It's not a big deal. No one cares. At the end of the day, unless you're a Demi Lovato fan, life goes on. But there was this need to label her a narcissist, a BS artist, and so when it gets to that point where you're like, okay, so you're judging another person's character, you don't even know this person, but you're also mad because someone judges your character and and they don't really know you. Like, you can't have both.
Again, you're not going to get fired from your job for being labeled a narcissist,
and you're not going to be. And again, have yet to see someone just get labeled. There's usually something they've said or done where we can argue back and forth. Maybe it's not to that extent, but there has to be something there. Like, there isn't like somebody just walking in the door, you're a racist. Oh, okay, I guess I'm a racist, I'm fired. There's always something there.
Okay, I'm just people in the chat are disagreeing with you. I don't have specific examples, but I bet we could probably dig up quite a few. The
Sure.
um
But again, like I said, there's always maybe a statement or something that they've said. There's never just somebody walked into a room and, oh, you're a racist, and then they got fired. You know?
Right, but you understand people are mischaracterizing the statements that people are saying. Like Sargon literally got kicked off of Patreon for cursing out ethno-nationalists in some other channel's chat, and they spun it on him, using the N-word.
Well, yeah, and I want to be able to make sure to separate whether or not I agree with him being kicked off with why somebody may have kicked him off.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with Patreon's decision.
Right.
But Patreon's view is the American view on the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
So the American view on the N-word is
drastically different than the British view. It's a great point. Yeah.
So Patreon is an American company. So when they see him going, oh, you're just a bunch of white ends,
mm-hmm.
What the American version of it is saying is you are white people acting like derogatory term for black people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where Patreon's going, okay, we have to respond with taking you off. Is it right for them to do it? No, I don't agree with that. But that's how Patreon looks at it. Now, the British version of it is a completely different version. But like I said before, Patreon's an American company, and that's why Patreon made that decision.
Well, I'm strictly talking about like the ethics of it more than the, they're a private company. That's a completely different discussion.
No, and I wasn't making.
All I want to make clear here is that if you call somebody, there are certain things that you can call somebody. There are certain accusations that you can make about people that are designed to damage their reputation and get them deplatformed. And just communism is not one of them. Communism is like taken out of the ballpark. So what
and that also depends on where in the country you're at. So since we are on a platform that is ran and operated along the coastlines or more in a liberal area, definitely there's going to be a liberal slant to how that moves. But I guarantee you, when you start moving to more rural, more conservative areas, being labeled as a communist or even a liberal will get you to lose your job. Now, the reason why we don't focus on it is because there isn't a huge influx of liberals trying to move into rural areas and work the areas in rural areas. But that's where the contrast lies. Since everything is trying to move towards the coast, move towards where I guess the more liberal areas are, there's going to be a liberal bias to how a lot of this is. Is it fair? No, but that's kind of how it works. But that does not mean that there aren't places where being labeled a communist or being labeled anywhere near a Democrat does not make your life a little bit more difficult. A lot more difficult in some areas.
I'm going to have to take your word for that. I don't see anything in the media about someone lost their job because they were labeled a communist.
Well, yeah,
that just seems laughable these days.
Well, because no one really cares about what Central Tennessee does. If you notice, unless there's like a huge, serious thing where either somebody dies.
But do you know? But I mean, I get what you're saying as a hypothetical. I'm just super suspect of hypotheticals. It's like, yes,
well, I used to work in those areas. So, okay. I mean, and I hate using myself.
I know, because it's
I hate using myself as an anecdote because it happens a lot. But unfortunately, there isn't really a huge focus on those areas. And those areas don't have much overall control of the country. So no one really pays attention to it.
Right.
When it comes to, and I would say it's also kind of because those areas operate in a more isolationist way. They don't really want to expand. They don't want to connect to the rest of the world. They want to be left alone. While a lot of areas that are leftist I guess, leftist grown, leftist owned are places which are, hey, we'll try to be as open as possible, but they're starting. I fully admit that they're starting to close more and become leftist isolationists. But for years, it has been come to this area, let's talk ideas, and then figure out what's going on. But as more and more ideas are coming in, more and more people think they should start regulating it. Do I think it's right? No, but that's just how it is right now.
Yeah, I just see it as way lopsided. If there's if the problem you're speaking about, labeling somebody a communist on social media is going to lose them their job in Louisiana, like hypothetically I could say sure, like possibly, but it's so divorced from the reality that we're looking at, where you have a bunch of people with various audiences on social media and on YouTube, basically in the commentary community, and one side is constantly being called communist. And I mean, I don't think Vosh would object to being called a communist. I think he would call himself a communist. And you're making the argument that no, Adam, it's bad for you to call Vosh a communist, and Vosh is more than within his right to call anyone else an ethno-nationalist.
Communist. I'm saying blatantly calling other people communists. Like, it doesn't, like, if Vosh calls himself, I think something socialist. I can't remember.
Yeah, a libertarian socialist. We laugh about it on the Sunday show all the time.
So I'm not saying people call Vosh.
Well, what are you saying then?
But what I'm saying is, like, for conversations like, say if somebody running as a Democrat wants to expand healthcare.
Right. Yes. No. Yeah. No, I get called that. Like, I'm for universal healthcare. I get called a communist all the time on that. I'm not worried about losing my job because of it.
Now, okay. That's why I'm saying it depends on where you're at. If you
do not like it when people call me an ethno-nationalist, because I'm not an ethno-nationalist. Yeah.
But you're also in an area where being called an ethno-nationalist could
potentially hurt me.
Yeah,
yes,
definitely.
Yeah.
But say if you're a Democrat and you're running for office in Central Tennessee or somewhere like that, and
bets are off. If you're running for office, names are going to be thrown. But I'm talking about normal people. I'm talking about, I'm talking about Vosh continually calling Sargon an ethno-nationalist to try to get him deplatformed, basically.
I don't know if he's trying to get him deplatformed. I mean, it can get him deplatformed, but I don't know if Vosh is actively trying to get him deplatformed. I don't like Vosh, like I keep saying, I don't like Vosh saying that, but I don't think he's actively trying to get him deplatformed. What I do think Vosh is doing is he's doing the same thing he's always done when he used to throw the word Nazi around to a lot of people. He gives this definition of what he means by it that is not the same definition of how a lot of the people that have been targeted Nazi will see it as.
Right.
I think the same thing's happening with his ethno-nationalist thing, where
that's bad faith. That's bad faith all the way.
Sure. And that's why in some cases with some people, well, with a lot of people, I think it's incredibly wrong. But I think when you're matching that up with somebody who has a history of distorting arguments in order to make bad faith
Vosh
representations.
Yeah.
Vosh too, but Sargon can't exactly say Vosh is bad faith and he's good faith. I see them as both.
Hold on. What I mean, we have Sargon on the Sunday show regularly because, like, how's he twisting his art? What are you even talking about?
There's multiple videos where he has, and I mean, you can find tons of leftist videos where they have pulled out Sargon's video and explained how he has either edited someone's words or stopped it before they can finish their complete argument in order to portray them as saying something that they didn't actually say. I don't have an example right now because I didn't really think I was going to get into an argument, not an argument, a
I saw
conversation
this.
that out. But
I saw this one time happen accidentally, and Sargon linked to the original video in the description of the video.
I've seen this quite a bit, and I've seen and a lot of leftists have pointed it out. A lot of leftists.
Well, you can't trust anything they say, though. They all hate Sargon. So
no, I'm not saying they're saying this. I'm saying that they've made videos where they've shown, hey, this is how Sargon represented what a person said. This is what they actually said.
Okay. Well, I'll have to see. I'll have to see those videos. Hey, do you care if I read some super chats? I think they might have questions for us. Do you want to also, maybe before I read the super chats, you want to lay out your basic argument on the systemic crime thing or systemic racism? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, we're going to just talk about black crime and how it links to systemic racism. But,
okay. You're not going to 1350 me, are you? I hear that's bad. I don't know what it is. I think you might have accused me of doing it.
1350 is just a meme of basically saying, okay, so somebody's throwing up the numbers 1350, but they're very hesitant to explain why something is the way it is, or they're trying to push a very bad faith argument as to why 1350 is 1350.
Can you explain what 1350 is? Just
it's basically I think it started on Stormfront, but it kind of got out here where there's
read Stormfront.
Oh yeah, I used to read it a lot.
Really? Oh my god.
I did a thing about radical interest groups when I was in college.
Wow.
And my first thing I did was go to like the KKK site and everything else, but every one of their sites are usually kind of vague and not exactly specific on their tactics as much as their beliefs. They'll give their beliefs very quickly, but you don't really look at their tactics. Stormfront had a lot of people online just explaining how to push their ideas. And that's where you started seeing like 1350 use the numbers 1350, but don't really argue as to why 1350. 13% of the population commit 15% or 50% of the crime. Don't really explain why that is. Don't really open up the door for a conversation into it. Just say 1350 and try your hardest to get them to focus as much on the statistic and not on the reason why the statistic exists. So that was heavily pushed.
What does this statistic mean, though? I'm not even sure I understand.
13% of the population will be the black population. 50% of, they say crime, but it's mostly violent crime and murders.
Okay.
So that's what they're saying is like, look at how.
So blacks make up 13% of the population and commit 50% of
violent crime.
Violent crime. Okay.
It's based off of like.
Is that an accurate statistic? I don't even know.
I think so. Like I said, it varies year to year, and it varies what's inside the statistic. I think it's like some shown like it's like 13, 34, and I mean it's a varying statistic, but 1350 is usually the one that's tossed out.
Okay.
But what I was trying to explain to you is crime rates are usually determined by 4 factors. Poverty, population density, psychological disenfranchisement, and undiagnosed mental health. African Americans or blacks are leading in every one of those categories. Now, one of those categories
was it 4? I only got poverty, density,
undiagnosed mental health.
Mental health. Was there another one? Is there 3 or 4?
4. Poverty, population density, psychological disenfranchisement, and undiagnosed mental health.
Disenfranchisement. Okay, good. I'm glad we got these out there. Franchise, man. Okay, and mental health.
Undiagnosed. So one of those alone can show an increase in crime rates just by itself, but it doesn't guarantee an increase in crime. So, for example,
We lost you for a second. Can you just back up?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
So we got the four
one
things.
of those alone. Uh-oh. Can you hear me
Yeah,
now?
I can.
Okay. One of those four things will show an increase in crime rates, but it doesn't guarantee an increase in crime rate, and it doesn't always do a rapid growth in crime rate. But when more of them work in tandem, you see a rapid growth in certain crime rates, especially violent crime. So, for example, poverty by itself doesn't always guarantee violent crime. For example, if you're in poverty, but you're in an area which is thousands of miles, or not thousands of miles, but miles between different properties or different people, it's very hard for there to be a high crime rate just because there's very limited person-to-person interaction.
Yeah, rural areas tend to not have high crime.
Yeah, because there's not nearly as much person-to-person interaction.
Well, there's not as many places to hide either.
Well, no, there's actually a lot of places to hide in rural areas, but there's not as many person-to-person interactions, and there's also, if there is a negative person-to-person interaction, there are places to separate in order for something to not escalate as quickly as maybe in an urban area where a densely populated, impoverished group of people will not have that ability to separate to be able to get the time away from each other to not exactly let something escalate.
Do you? Where's this from? Where are you getting this information from? Just out of curiosity, or is this your own argument?
This is a combination of my own and just a collection of readings, mostly Tim Wise.
Okay,
but just as trying to see if I can find certain links to show this.
no, it's okay. I'm taking your word for it right now, just to get the argument. I'm more of a like big picture guy anyway, so I have my own thoughts. Obviously, I mean disenfranchisement is like a big one.
Well, psychological disenfranchisement. So it's not
right.
It's not as much I can't vote here, but what is my vote worth, and is it even worth trying to participate in the system?
Yeah, I make this argument all the time. I say that the left is the one perpetuating this psychological disenfranchisement on people when they're telling them, you know, you're black, you don't, the society stacked against you. There's no, like, nothing you can do will overcome how much white supremacy is breathing down your neck. That is what's creating psychological disenfranchisement. I mean, if I grew up my entire life with every single adult telling me that there's no way that I could succeed in this white supremacist world, I would start throwing Molotov cocktails and say, fuck it.
Sure, but I would say you're less likely if you don't see something happening in the neighborhood that you are living in that kind of confirms that argument. So
okay,
I'm not saying just walking outside, all of a sudden the white person's going to show up and F you, black person, punch you in the face, don't leave. You know, I'm not saying that. I'm saying
so you're making a specific argument. I just want to make it clear here.
Yes.
The psychological disenfranchisement could be legitimately taking place because of material conditions. Material conditions are horrible. The person lives in poverty. They're in a bad family setting. Maybe they're a foster kid, all that stuff. Like, so they get the message from society that it's a white supremacist culture, and, you know, whites basically, the whole CRT idea that the society is structured to basically take the whatever blacks produce and give it to whites. That's the idea behind critical race theory. So this idea
there's a little bit more to critical race theory than that. I don't really want to get into that because that's going to be a longer conversation.
Let me just finish my argument here. So
okay.
So that the person that gets told this if they are living in a situation where they see their material conditions are horrible, they're more likely to believe this, and they're also more likely to be at a serious disadvantage of getting ahead. Correct?
I would say more.
Let me let me just finish my argument. I do
Okay.
sometimes I do this. I ask for feedback along the way just to make sure people understand, and I get somebody that just is going to disagree with every single thing that I say, so it's impossible for me to even get the argument out. So let me just continue.
Okay.
So there's material conditions that are driving this, and there's also the psychological state that society has kind of put out there. But there are also people who are Black people who are living in a situation that's not that impoverished situation, but they're still getting the same exact message. So I would argue that there's a scale of how disempowered you are that completely relates to the first factor, the poverty factor, more than it relates to the psychological disenfranchisement factor, and that we're basically poisoning the well by even putting any of this CRT stuff out there. And that's mostly why I'm so vigorously against it, because I think it damages people more than it helps them.
Okay, so in order to actually challenge CRT with you, I'd have to go fully into what CRT is talking about, right. And I don't know how much time you have for that part of it, but I don't see it like that. So, for example, the more
do you like do you accept that there is this idea that we live in a white supremacist, systemically racist culture? It sounds like that's kind of the argument you're laying out here.
Well, it depends on how you're defining white supremacist and systemic racism.
Okay, so
because if you're looking at it as, so white supremacy has created by acts of motivating the the Great Migration, creating sundown towns, creating redlining, all of this extenuating till after the last state was ratified, then natural conditions would show that only 40 some odd years is not going to repair the segregation and basically the isolation of the Black community. So even if every person that's ever hated a Black person in history suddenly just disappeared, the system created will still operate this in a short amount of time the way it's supposed to, because, for example, no matter how much money the Black community has, I can't force another person off their property, even if they've obtained that property from, even if you can trace that they've obtained that property from a town chasing a Black person off that land. You know, there's still laws that keep you from taking that land, which the law is not, in no way, shape, or form am I saying the law is unjust, but it creates difficulties that prevent something from being fixed in the first 20, 30, or 40 years.
Well, my ancestors came here from Ireland, though, but they didn't have land when they came here, and they bought land. What's stopping the Black community from just
nothing's stopping the
purchasing
Black community
land
from purchasing land. That's why there are Black people moving out and purchasing land. Mm-hmm. If you're looking for 35 to 50 million people to migrate out of the inner city in a matter of 30 to 40 years, that's not going to happen. That's an incredibly illogical and irrational requirement for an entire portion of the population to do.
I mean, all of these arguments I agree with about the Black community starting at a disadvantage because of the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. I buy into that stuff.
No. That's why I want to make sure to, because I'm getting to the point of where the white supremacy argument is, because I want to
Continue
make
that.
sure that you understand that I'm not saying that white supremacy is in the sense of the Klan is forcing everyone. No, 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 no. But where white supremacy and systemic racism works is just right now. Um, there are areas that have been historically discriminated and segregated against. A lot of those areas are both isolated, segregated, and heavily monitored. It is not very easy. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not very easy to move out of those areas because the people that actually do own land in those areas have seen their property values devalue or drop while the rest of the country has seen their property values rise. So in a lot of cases, in order for people to move from one area to another, they usually would have to sell something or take out a major loan. If you don't really have much in the sense of selling, you're going to have to take out a major loan, and that is a huge risk for a population that doesn't exactly have a set generational fallback. And I'm not saying every single white person does either. I want to be very clear in saying that we're talking about the populations as a whole. So even if somebody came from Ireland with 15 cents in a dream and hopped off the boat and immediately made $400 million just through hard work and prosperity, that doesn't exactly mean 35 to 50 million Irish people all at the same time in a matter of 30 years made millions of dollars and moved out.
Right. I get what you're saying about the lower property values in the inner cities and stuff like that. Obviously lower property values have to do with crime rates. And I mean, I read one study where they were talking about how the civil rights riots during the 1960s really hurt the black community more than anything because they lowered the property values. And anywhere there was a riot, the property values tanked. And
Sure.
this made it more difficult for them to get out.
Well, yes, but
so
they were, and if you look at, I can't remember the study.
But we still haven't gotten to the white supremacy thing, though. Like the white supremacy today.
So the white supremacy is saying the white supremacist decisions will still always be here, even if the white supremacy is gone. Basically saying that no individual, even if we could find individuals that were full white supremacists, that's not exactly the argument being made. What's being made is the decisions made through white supremacy are still prevalent today.
And they are what is holding the black community down?
The community, yes. Individuals, no. So what that means is...
Okay, so explain that. Because like redlining's illegal now.
Yeah. Redlining's illegal, but if you look at property values surrounding those neighborhoods, they've gone up 2, 3, 4, 5, even 1,000% in some areas.
Mm-hmm.
So even if now you have the ability to buy a house outside of the inner city, you will have to take out exorbitant loans in order to even try to move, unless you are capable of, in one generation, doing something that took many people, multiple generations to do.
It's difficult, and I mean I'm sympathetic to that.
I'm saying because it's difficult, it's not impossible. Because it's difficult, it has created a situation where over time it's going to fix itself. But to expect in a matter of 40 to 50 years, a group segregated against for hundreds of years to move on par to immigrant groups have people that come from 15 cents in a dream to sons and daughters of major companies in their own countries to be able to offset their statistics.
The problem I have, I don't believe it is going to improve over time. And I think the reason it's not going to improve over time is this entire argument that's being made about this invisible white supremacy, because you're basically telling the majority of the population that it's impossible.
Nope.
And doing the impossible, just people check out. This is why people don't vote. This is why people don't
No
like
one said.
participate in a lot of things.
Well, that's a weird interpretation of it, because that's like saying pointing out any difficulty in society, no matter how accurate, is automatically viewed as an impossibility. So that's like saying
Don't you think these arguments are structured in a way that makes the moving up seem impossible? If white
no,
supremacy is
um
ever present, invisible, systemic, and always against you, don't you think that that is going to
no, because
discourage only the everyone but the most motivated go-getter? And we should be encouraging everybody of every industriousness throughout society?
no, because it's factual. And
What
you
do you
can't,
mean it's
if you
factual?
look up, it's factual in the sense of these things did happen. And because these things did happen, it does not mean you cannot go move up. It does not mean it's impossible, but it does mean statistics are going to be incredibly different from one group from another if that one group has endured something different than the other group.
Right.
It's kind of common sense. So you can't really look at that and go, okay, well, because I've gone through something different, it's impossible for me to do anything. No, but you can look at it as, because I've gone through something, or because my generation has gone through something different, there's going to be variables that are incredibly different in the growth and development of each group.
Do you understand the argument that I'm making about how this kind of treatment will discourage a lot of people? Do you disagree with that? Do you disagree that the idea, like just the ideas that we're putting forward, that communities have this invisible systemic racism pointed at them, will discourage a lot of people?
No, because overall blacks have done increasingly well connected to their own circumstances. But it does not matter what conversation we have, there's always going to be negative variables. And if you look at any negative variable and go, well, okay, this stops me from doing anything, that's still a personal choice. But that
I disagree wholeheartedly. I think you're discouraging. I think you're discouraging a lot of people. I think you're sending a lot of people on destructive paths that they normally would not be on if we had a much different narrative structuring our lives.
So lie.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is why I made the distinction, because there is a prevalent narrative that either affects people or doesn't affect people, that you're saying, no, this affects everybody. So if there is 50% of the black community is middle class doing just fine, and 50% of the black community is impoverished, and you're giving this narrative to the entire black community, you're going to get the 50% of the community that's impoverished. They're going to say, look, I look around, I see this every day. Of course,
Wait, Adam,
I agree with it. But if you're giving it to
we're talking about why crime is higher in the black community. We're not talking about every single black person.
Well, okay. Well, I didn't realize this conversation was focused specifically on crime.
Well, yeah, I'm pointing out the variables as to why it would be higher in the black community than it would in the white community overall, or the Hispanic community overall, the Asian community overall. I'm not saying every single black person is in a certain position. I'm saying more black people are in X position, which would mean more black people would be in the variables that create higher crime rates. So it's in proportion to the population, not the population as a whole. Like, nobody's telling LeBron James's son. I mean, somebody might be, but for the most part, nobody's telling LeBron James's son, hey, white supremacy is holding you down. You're being beaten up by the Klan.
I'm not sure this conversation, maybe I'm taking it in. I thought you were explaining all this stuff because you were explaining the whole your idea behind systemic racism in society.
Yeah,
how you're saying that systemic racism is causing higher rates of crime in the black community. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying the effects of previous white supremacy and systemic racism leads to the increase in crime rates in a society.
Is the crime being driven by resentment, or is it being driven by material conditions?
Yes, but it's created.
Which one?
No, it's both. Some crimes are created because since the population density is high enough, there's a circumstance of something as simple as somebody has hurt somebody else's brother, so in response, somebody hurts them. It's one of those things where if you have thousands and thousands of interactions a day,
what does that have anything to do with race?
well, that's again when there's more black people in a situation where the population density is highest, it's going to be higher in the black community for that type of crime to happen. Interpersonal crime happens with a higher rate of interpersonal interactions.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with systemic racism or whites or any of that.
Well, how they got to the neighborhood is exactly something connected to systemic racism.
Right. So you're saying that the blacks live in higher density areas because whites put them there and
because of the Great Migration. So there was no, hey, let's at gunpoint chase black people here. It was, hey, multiple incidents have happened involving white supremacy of the past, which forced a migration of African Americans from open rural areas to highly dense northern areas. And then right after they moved into those areas, both the driving force of those areas, which was manufacturing, collapsed, and property values dropped to the point of it's nearly impossible to sell your house and move out.
It's so not, none of this is tied to race though. All this is just tied to circumstance. That's where I'm having trouble.
But it explains why it's higher for a certain race to have 1350 than someone else, because the variables that increase crime rate.
It's difficult. I feel like we're having two different conversations here. Can we stick to one? You keep talking about the higher crime rates.
Yes.
And the systemic racism, white supremacy, ever present interchangeably. But I think those are two separate issues. It's completely separate issues.
Because it's kind of
you're making the argument that the black community has higher crime rates because of white supremacy. Because of systemic racism.
Yes. Because and again,
what is the causal connection here?
I've just explained. If you're looking at rates, crime rates, and you do it by race, which is what's happening when people do 1350. They're saying 13% of the population, black people, commit 50% of the crime. So they are already that argument is already separating who's committing crimes by race, what percentage of the crimes are made by that race. So the racial aspect has already been divided. My response is the reason why 13% of the population commit 50% of the crimes is because a higher percentage of that 13% is in impoverished,
poverty, density,
populated,
mental health,
disenfranchised areas with very a low sense of or a high sense of undiagnosed mental health.
Right. But if a white community was in the same exact situation,
Northern Boston,
the same outcome would be higher crime rates.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. A good example of that is Boston. If you look into the more impoverished areas,
but that means it's not a race thing. That means it's a circumstance thing. It's a material conditions thing.
But the material conditions and the circumstances are because of decisions that happen.
Now that is where you have that's the argument that I'm trying to get to. That's the argument that I'm trying to get to, and that is the CRT argument. The critical race theory argument is that there are these invisible structures of oppression that have been created so white people benefit at the expense of black people, and white people as a group build systems to subjugate black people. And I don't like, how is that a thing?
That's not
How does that
exactly
exist?
the argument. The argument is um, systemic or not systemic, white supremacy forced African Americans into certain areas. And because they were forced into those certain areas were devalued. And it wasn't until
But it's got to
after.
be more. It's got to be more than just property rights. It's got to be more than
Well,
the
it's not
property.
just, well, that's what I'm trying to explain. It's not just property. It's where they are, what happened in those areas, and why they got to those areas.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a higher portion of a population in a certain situation, that would increase the crime rates.
What is stopping these communities though? Like gentrification is a big issue on the left. Like what is stopping these people from just gentrifying their own communities?
What is stopping people from gentrifying their own communities? I mean, nothing's. I'm confused on what you mean by gentrifying their own communities.
Well, people always talk about gentrification, where whites move into predominantly black neighborhoods. They start fixing them up. The property values go up, and then pretty soon, none of the blacks can afford to live there. Like, what's
Yes.
stopping blacks from just doing that themselves?
What's stopping blacks from raising the property rate so high it removes other blacks from a neighborhood?
No, gentrifying their own,
Well,
fixing up their own neighborhoods.
well, gentrification isn't just
I
fixing
guess that
something up.
I guess they're renting there, so it's kind of a catch-22. They don't actually own the property. They probably have like a bunch of slumlords that own the.
Yeah, gentrification isn't just. It's not just, hey, let's move into a neighborhood and fix it up. It is actively um, moving one population out of an area while actively moving another population in. And it's taking advantage of what you just said. It's taking advantage of the fact that a lot of those areas that blacks have moved into aren't really owned by black people.
Mhm. Yes,
So,
yeah, they're
so
landlords. Yeah,
a
no,
lot of
I understand the situation. My thing is, and the like, I don't disagree with some of the stuff that you're saying. My problem is with a lot of the critical race theory and a lot of this white supremacy. I mean, I understand the argument that you're making. You're like, this is how do we point to this if if we can't call it. It's such a catch-22. Like as soon as you start saying like society's structured against you, you're going to get most people in a mindset not even really to try. And
well,
that's going to that's going to create a downward spiral and perpetuate the problem.
sure, but to label that as the top reason why there hasn't been a rapid shift in 40 years is kind of arrogant. You know, like
Mhm.
we're talking about a portion of the population of 35 to 50 million people obtaining and moving in a matter of one generation, um, either out of these areas or fixing these areas with very limited personal resources and not enough of that group that are powerful enough or hold enough natural resources or hold enough resources in general to be able to shift these communities so rapidly. We're
Right.
looking for a rapid shift, and that's not going to happen.
Is,
So,
is any of it, would you blame any of it on culture? Would you think any of it is cultural?
sure, but culture is a response to something. So culture doesn't just appear. Culture doesn't. A bunch of people don't get together and go, "Oh, nothing's happening. Let's build a culture off of it." No, culture is a response. Everything is a response to something else.
I agree. I agree.
So,
But
so a black to look up and go, okay, this is culture, and culture alone is intellectually lazy.
Mhm.
Culture is a response to something. What is culture responding to? You know, that's where once you find out what that culture is responding to, then you can address the culture.
Well, what I worry about, in specifically on this topic and critical race theory, is the the narrative that's being put forth is that white people are an oppressor class and that the black community should be weary of them because they're like these they're basically building structures of power to siphon everything of value from them. And this
And
is
that is the laziest. And
so you don't buy into that narrative. That's good to hear.
well, it's a lazy narrative. It's a lazy interpretation of CRT. What it is so people keep asking, okay, how do we fix this in 20 years? You know, how do we fix this in a very short amount of time? Go. And so
Yes, I agree.
a lot of the CRT advocates are answering with, well, okay, in order for this to happen, there would have to be incredibly large, rapid changes. And when they start giving what those rapid changes are, oh, you're saying that I'm racist, where it's like, no, they're giving you the answer to the question you're asking. But CRT is only determining why things are the way they are.
Where am I getting it wrong? You said it was a lazy interpretation. Where am I getting it wrong with the narrative? Because that's the narrative that I see.
Because you're conflating the answers to how to fix it with what it is. So CRT is, okay, what happened to move these people out of rural areas in the South? What happened to get them up to northern areas in the North? What happened to decrease property values? What happened to increase the culture? What happened to what happened? Okay. That's all CRT is. What we get into the weeds with is, okay, well, I as a company want to address this, but I also don't really want to address it in actually doing anything. So what's the best answer for this? Oh, well, let's hire this person to give a crash course on something that is decades of study, condense it into a bunch of stuff that we can absorb, and then release it out to the public. And then once released out to the public, there is a very, I would say, dishonest group of people who go through all of the information in that article, find the one or two sentences that they can go, oh, this is saying white people hate black people. Let me post that.
Well, what if I'm getting it wrong, what is the narrative?
The narrative is what I've said before. Black people are in the situation they are in currently because of decisions that have happened but decisions that have happened before now.
Right.
Over time, they should flatten out. But it's going to take time. Now, this is where we get into the weeds. If you want something rapid, if you want an instant answer, that's where you start getting into, okay, well,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we began this conversation. It seemed that you bought into the idea that white supremacist systems were part of what systemic racism was. You started defining systemic racism.
Yes. And again, and I made it very clear, there's a difference between a white supremacist system and a white supremacist.
So yes, let's talk about the white supremacist system, because that's what everybody's talking about now. I realize racism today doesn't mean individuals being racist against one another. Racism today, the conversation that we're having around CRT and all this other stuff, has to do with systems of white supremacy that have been constructed to aid white people at the expense of black people. Do you disagree with that narrative?
Not really. And here, let me explain it.
Let me just be clear here, because you're saying, do you disagree that that's not the narrative of CRT, or do you disagree that is not what's going on in the real world?
A little bit of both. The narrative of CRT, because
okay. So just to be clear, so that's not going on in the world. So there aren't systems of race. There aren't racist systems devised by white people to subjugate black people. You think that's not true?
Yeah, no, because that's why the word systemic is being used.
So how are you defining systemic racism then?
Okay, so systemic racism is something that is already happening, not something that is or something that is already happening because it works alongside a system. So let me give you an example of how this will work, and maybe you can understand this a little better. So say you have a house, I have a house.
Mhm.
Okay. We both have this house through family. So before either of us were born, my grandfather came to your house, beat up your grandfather, put your grandfather in a closet. Okay? That's where your grandfather lives, in the closet of his own house. For the next X amount of years, my family has used both houses that we've obtained to profit and grow. So by the time the two of us are born, you go, okay, this is what happened and this is why I am in a closet. Okay? I would like to. So at the end of the day, you are making money off of both houses except for the closet.
No,
I'm making money off of the closet.
I understand the intergenerational wealth
You gotta
argument.
let me finish though, because I'm trying to explain why this is linked to white supremacy.
Okay.
So obviously you are going to say, hey, I should get at least my house back. Now, the law says you don't have a right to anything because the law gives me property rights. My property rights is my property. You have no right to this home. I didn't put you in that closet. My grandfather did.
Is
I
this a
don't
metaphor or a specific situation?
It's a
I mean,
metaphor. It's a
losing.
metaphor. Just
Oh.
stick with me for a second. So, is the law that says that you're not allowed to have the rest of your house racist? No. But does that law protect a racist decision?
What
Yes.
is this? What is this a metaphor of though? What is the house in the metaphor? What are we talking
The
about?
house is generational wealth.
Okay, so I understand the intergenerational wealth thing.
Then
Like,
you understand. Wait. Then
whites
whites
tend to leave more intergenerational wealth to their offspring than blacks do.
But it's not just leaving. If you understand the situation that I've just given you,
Mhm.
then you also understand that regardless of whether or not I am personally racist against you,
Mhm.
you, by just the virtue of you not being able to just come out and take anything in that house because there is a law protecting you, my property rights are protecting me from you taking any of that house back.
But this is such a weird metaphor because this doesn't apply to like 90% of people. 90% of people weren't in a situation where their ancestors inherited stolen wealth from their ancestors. That's such like maybe in the upper
No.
1% you're talking about.
And see that's why I wanted to make sure you understood the difference
I
between
don't
the
under. I have
individual.
no idea what we're talking about here.
No.
Like we've
I wanted to make
completely
sure.
gone like in a bizarre direction. You've got so you're basically saying that whites as a group stole a bunch of property from blacks as a group and passed it down to their children through the generations.
And I want to make sure you understand that when I'm saying that, I'm not saying every single white person. I am saying that African Americans lost land. Doesn't matter if whites gained. It does not matter if you've gained anything from it. What matters is blacks have lost that land, which means they've lost that intergenerational wealth, which means they are starting more often than not from zero, more than the rest of the population, regardless of if you've profited from it. Some have profited from it.
But
some
you
haven't profited from it.
You are buying into the narrative though that this is whites oppressing blacks. I mean, the metaphor that you laid out is the exact metaphor that is the metaphor that I'm citing as the problem. Like you're setting up a situation where you're like coming here and accusing like my parents of stealing from your parents.
But you know what? That is a decision you've made. That's a decision you've made because I've said
I haven't made the
times,
decision. You're
yes,
the
you
one
have.
setting up these accusations. How did I make the decision?
No. I've said multiple times. You personally don't have to do anything.
Do you
because
see?
No one is
do you
calling
see
you,
why
no,
people are?
No one is calling you personally anything.
But do you see how people are offended by this? Do you understand how people are offended by this?
If you want to be offended by it, like seriously, let's. If someone says 1350, and they say 1350, and I go, they're accusing me of committing a crime. I've never committed a crime. I'm black, but they're accusing me of committing a crime. You would look me directly in the face and go, well, no one's accusing you of a crime. We are citing a statistic.
First of all, you're the one that taught me that statistic. Okay, I didn't go looking for that statistic.
Well, no,
you
but
put it in my face.
But it doesn't. Wait, whether or not who told who the statistic doesn't mean the statistic doesn't exist. I'm telling you, just saying 1350 does not mean that I, as a black person, committed a crime. It means you're citing a statistic. And I'm not saying you said that. I'm just saying, just as that works the same way as
both are bad. Both are terrible. Yes, both are awful.
Sure, they're both statistics. And you can take whatever you want from the information, but it doesn't mean the information is wrong or the information is invalid. It just means you are taking what you want to take from that information. I can't control how you absorb information. I can only give you the information. If the information is inaccurate or if the information is wrong, then argue that. But if you're arguing that this makes me feel a certain way, I can't change how you feel about information coming out.
Well, I'm saying that situation is going to be offensive to a lot of people. it's going to be, well, it's the same exact thing. Your narrative here is going to be offensive to a lot of people in the same way that the narrative on the opposite side is just as offensive to a lot of people. Like, we need some kind of shared narrative that allows people to succeed. The problem that I have with all this stuff is that it sets up a situation where if you think society is structured against me and my chances of success are like 5%, 10%, that is a totally demotivating act. That makes people not want to try.
You've made two completely different statements. One statement is society is completely against me, which that's not really what's being said by Sierra.
Listen, the metaphor that you set up is that before you were even born, a white person broke into your great-grandparents' house, stole all of their things, locked him in a closet, and subjugated him to their will, and then gave the stolen property to their descendants up until you. Like, if I heard that narrative as a black man, I'd be fucking stealing cars every single day of my life.
Why?
Because the amount of resentment I would feel would be untenable.
So, you say you're from Ireland, right?
My grandfather's from Ireland. Yeah.
Okay. So, why did your grandfather come to the United States?
I have no idea. Yeah.
Okay. So, what was the year?
Probably opportunity. I'm not sure.
I'm guessing. I'm going to spitball here, but I'm guessing by your age and by your grandfather's age, probably something to do with the famine.
Well, I don't know, but why is it important?
Now,
you're kind of changing the subject a little bit.
No, I'm trying to use your example to where, regardless of what happened,
you're like, where was he? My grandfather was in Chicago. Your grandfather was in Chicago? Oh my God, he must have stolen his property.
That's not what I said at all.
Well, no, but you understand the situation.
No, I don't. What I'm starting to understand is there is a desire to use your own emotions to not look at what actually happened. I mean, what I'm explaining happened is not.
What are you citing when you use the metaphor of your white grandparents ripped off the black grandparents? What historical evidence are you citing to make that claim?
Jim Crow and the Great Migration.
Okay.
So Jim Crow happened where multiple communities did things. I mean, we can talk about each individual community, but multiple areas did things to make living in certain areas untenable for blacks, to get them out of those areas. That's fact. That's not debatable. That's a fact.
I don't dispute any of that stuff. Jim
Okay,
Crow
well,
was awful. They had literary tests. They wouldn't let blacks vote. Blacks
so if that's
were
indisputable,
disenfranchised.
I want to make sure. So that's indisputable.
Right.
So regardless of how you feel about that information, it's indisputable information.
But you're conflating two different arguments. You're conflating the blacks had a started behind in the race. There's that argument, which is made. And then there's the argument that the systems that we're living with now
Nope.
are still structured in this
No,
white supremacist way.
And again, if you listen to the example I gave,
So
I
you
said
disagree with the white supremacist systems now?
I never said there were white supremacist systems. I said there was systemic racism based off of white supremacist decisions.
Right. In the past.
Yes.
Okay.
So past decisions create the climate for current statistics.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the argument is. It's not there's white supremacists outside beating black people. No, it is past decisions because of how close we are to that past. Because again, it's only arguably, however you want to look at it, between 60 and 40 years ago. Because of how short of a time limit that is, there's still going to be residual effects from those decisions.
Right. But the CRT guys are like, people are coming out and saying, listen, it takes time for society to change. Civil rights only happened 40 years ago. Things are moving slow. The CRT people will come out and say, no, things aren't moving slow. Things never changed. That instead of it being open racism, like during Jim Crow, now we have these secret systems of oppression that we still have Jim Crow going, but it's no. They never say it's secret. There's nobody says there's a secret society of racists doing anything. What they're saying is hidden,
because
they do say hidden.
Yeah, it is hidden because it's not blatant. There's no person saying, hey, you can't live here. It's just there are property values that have increased exponentially in certain areas, that because there's not as much generational wealth in one area than another, the likelihood of African Americans moving into those areas drop. And they can't force people out of those areas because property laws exist. So it's not saying that white supremacists are stopping people from moving there. What they're saying is you can't expect one generation to be able to solve the gaping hole that hundreds of years of decisions have made.
My argument, though, is that you're never going to solve this problem by demoralizing people with this total black pill narrative that there are systems of oppression being set up right now to make sure that everything you earn ends up in a white person's pocket. That's demoralizing to people.
I don't think I ever said that, but I will say this. African Americans or blacks do not own either very little or no natural resources in the United States. Right. Now, because we don't own any of the natural resources or very little of the natural resources in the United States, by default, we are dependent on the people that do.
Well, wait a second, though.
So wait. I mean, you've made the argument that at the end of the day, no matter how much a black person makes, their money is going to go to a white person. I'm explaining why a person makes that argument. Because African Americans have to rely on the dominant society, regardless of what you do, your dollar will end up in the dominant group's hand. Does that mean that dominant group is standing over you and oppressing you? No. But that's because of decisions made prior to any of us born that prevented African Americans from being able to obtain the natural resources for self-determination in that department.
So I've laid out this argument that CRT makes, and you've said I've mischaracterized CRT, and you've said that I don't have a good understanding of it, yet you seem to agree with the CRT argument that whites are subjugating blacks economically.
I've never said subject, and again, I don't know. You're
Well,
using
you basically
wait,
are. You're listen.
words.
You're saying, first of
You're
all,
using words I'm not using.
there's a huge problem.
You're using words I'm not.
There's a giant problem with saying whites own natural resources, because like what are we talking about here? Are we talking about like
Steel, coal.
Predominantly whites are CEOs? Is that what we're talking about? Because whites are not a monolith. Because some person is the CEO of a company, it doesn't benefit me in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, because I never said Adam takes my money.
Right. But
so I mean, no. But this is a pattern I'm realizing.
Mm-hmm.
So every time I talk about something in a macro scale,
mm-hmm.
you have a desire to bring it to yourself. Take it as an issue. Take it as an attack on yourself, even though multiple times in every single example, I am explaining to you why one group and another group interact in a society. You seem to have a need to pull it to your own personal feelings.
Well,
I never said
you're the one that's racializing it. Like, I wouldn't necessarily racialize it.
Well, it's already racialized. Like I said, 1350 is already racialized.
That is your argument, not mine. Okay.
Well, no, it's also the United States DOJ.
Right, but we're the idea that you would build a narrative around the fact that, I guess it's the fact that
your argument is because somebody is answering the question based off race, already made off race, that person is the problem. Not the question that we get. I didn't create 1350. The Department of Justice said whites have this many crimes, blacks have this many crimes.
Right.
They never said Americans have this many crimes. They have whites, they have blacks. So because there's that separation, any attempt to explain that separation, this is coming from you. Any attempt to explain that separation that isn't just every single individual committing every single crime is doing it because of culture, somehow affects you personally in such a way that you cannot absorb the information.
No, I can absorb the information.
Then why are you immediately moving it to anyone that hears this information is automatically just going to give up on life, instead of seeing it as this is just information, regardless of how you absorb it, it's information.
Well, no, there's the facts and there's the narrative, and I'm talking about the narrative when I say the narrative is demoralizing. The idea that there are hidden systems of oppression designed to subjugate black people at the expense of white people's economic gain is a demoralizing narrative. It's a narrative that you would teach people to demoralize them.
And I mean, you keep saying that no matter how many times I say to you that systems of oppression is not really what's being said. They're saying systematic. They're saying systematic racism is creating a gap based on race because white supremacy has already created that gap.
But your metaphor is basically that same exact narrative. How is it not that narrative?
Because no. That the metaphor is what actually happened. Like regardless of how you feel about it, that metaphor is what happened. African Americans lost millions of acres of land, millions of acres of property, millions of dollars of wealth because of actions that happened prior to either of us being born. That's a factual statement. That's not anything else but factual.
And you're making the argument that blacks would be in the same exact situation as whites proportionally if that event did not take place?
I can't say same exact. I'm not Nostradamus on that,
Mhm.
but in a lot better and a lot more tenable situation, of course. Definitely.
So how do you get past that?
Depends how fast you want it fixed.
So
If
is
you want
this
it
like
fixed,
a reparations argument? Is that basically what you're saying?
if you want it fixed in 20 to 50 years, yes, because you're going to have to do the same thing that the United States government did to fix the huge income gap prior to and after the Great Depression, to where you would have to do things to incentivize uh, a rapid growth, rapid mobility system. So if if you want something to happen that quick, you'll have to do something for it to happen that quick. But if you don't want something to happen that quick, then you're probably going to have to just wait and allow things to naturally fix themselves. You're going to have to allow some property owners to fail at their property. And when those properties become available, African Americans that are more successful gain those properties. But I can't force someone off a property that they own. And no matter how much money I have, I can't force them off that property. I have to wait for them to sell that property in order for me to get it. It has to happen naturally if we're looking for something to happen naturally.
Let me read some super chats because I think people have questions, and we'll go for another 30 minutes. Do you have to? We never really discussed time. I usually stream from 6 to 8, so we've talked for an hour and a half already, believe it or not.
I'm good with 30 minutes. Sure.
Let me read some super chats because I think people might have some questions for you, and I mean, there might be some talking past one another going here, but I just like my thing is I worry that we're setting people up for failure, and that's my biggest worry. So contrast for $2 says A team. Love it. Doctor, do you listen to our Sunday show at all?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Cool. I'm with my son mostly, so I catch it when I can.
Cool. Dr. Cataclysm for $2 says, the where's that smoke? Where there's smoke, there's fire fallacy. Yeah. I think that was related to Sargon and our conversation about that. Red Wall 1521 for $5 says James Damore was literally fired for stating facts about how the gender bias exists in software jobs. Do you want to comment on that?
I mean, that doesn't exactly counter what I said.
Yeah.
James Damore actually had to say something. Now, I don't agree with James Damore firing, but James Damore actually said something. No, I don't agree with it.
Hallelujah.
No, but what I'm saying is James Damore at least had to say something. James Damore didn't walk into Google, somebody go, James Damore's a racist, and then James Damore got fired. He actually had to say something or do something.
This is the perfect example of what I'm talking about, though, because you yourself agree that James Damore was mischaracterized for what he said as a misogynist pig.
Definitely.
Yes, and he was fired for being a misogynist pig, that he wasn't a misogynist pig, correct?
And well, Google says, and we can argue whether or not Google's telling the truth or not. Google says they fired James Damore because James Damore didn't answer the question. James Damore decided to take what Google asked and to give his own argument that wasn't what they asked for. So he didn't do what they asked.
You don't believe that for a second.
I'm just saying, I'm giving you their response.
Yeah. You believe James Damore was fired for being a misogynist pig, right?
No, I believe James Damore was fired just because Google didn't want to ruffle feathers.
Right, and because all the women in the workplace were calling him a misogynist pig for what he wrote.
Yeah, and again,
which was a mischaracterization of what he said. This is the entire argument that I'm making about the ethno-nationalist stuff. They're mischaracterizing people as ethno-nationalists based on what they said but didn't mean.
Sure, but you also linked it to certain things where, like I told you, like the white N-words. Like Patreon didn't kick Sargon off because somebody showed up and said, hey, Sargon's a racist. Patreon kicked Sargon off because Sargon called a bunch of people white N-words. We know what N-words mean.
Yeah.
So there was something said. And that's my point.
Sargon probably took it a little too far. I think we probably agree there. Jacob Sanker for $5 says, is it not a two-way street? How can one be taken seriously today when racist is defined in different terms? Does that not create a shield as well?
Hold on for a second.
Is it not a two-way street? How can we be taken seriously when racist is defined in two different
Sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Jacob Sanker for $5. Is it not a two-way street? How can one be taken seriously today when racist is defined in different terms? Does that not create a shield as well? I think he's talking about the systemic racism term versus the individual racism term. I agree that redefining the terms is not helpful, and I also think it's done nefariously.
They're being qualified. So racism's not being redefined in systemic racism. It's being qualified as to what they mean when they're saying racism. So if I say, I don't know, pink building, it doesn't mean every building possible, because every building's not a pink building. I'm talking about a specific building. So with systemic racism, it's not saying all racism. It's saying a specific way that racism moves in the system.
Jacob Sanker for $5 says, no one gets fired for being anything. I live in Missouri and I work with communists. No one is fired for horse crap like that. BS. So he's disagreeing with your
sure argument. And again, this is one of those things where media sources are going to have to just go into rural communities in order to prove it. But I mean, one of my first jobs was to tear down abandoned and foreclosed properties in those areas, and definitely if you were labeled a liberal or Democrat or a communist in those areas, it was nearly impossible to find employment.
Soupy Comics for $5 says, it's hard to have a conversation with Loser when he has zero grip on reality. That is about what what you tweet at me on Twitter.
I mean, sure. I don't even know how to respond to that, because I don't know what he.
Redwall 1521 says for $10 says, it's not getting canceled. It's not getting called label on social media that gets someone fired. The brigade on social media that calls up their employer gets them fired. Loser doesn't understand the social cultural side.
No. I'm not saying that people aren't being unjustly canceled. Man, I wish your audience would understand the difference. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying people aren't being unjustly canceled. What I'm saying is something has to be said or done. There's not a group of people just appearing, pointing to someone, calling them a name, and then they get fired.
Do you understand the counter argument, though, is that they aren't doing anything. What they are doing is being mischaracterized as something.
And I never disagreed with that. I said
they are innocent.
Was wrong for mischaracterizing them, and I also said that almost every person you listed shouldn't have been fired.
Right. They are innocent.
They shouldn't have been. The only thing that I am arguing against is the idea of just being labeled gets you fired. No, there's usually a connection. There's usually something else there.
Oh my God. It's so painful. Do you understand that there is no there? That it's a mischaracterization of what they have said or done.
Well, the mischaracterization is still the there. That's the there. The mischaracterization.
You're saying they must have done something.
No.
And I'm saying yes,
something.
they did something innocuous that people mischaracterized as something racist or sexist or homophobic.
That's still something that happened. I'm not saying it's
but it's completely unjust.
I'm saying, sure, But I'm saying it's something that happened. I'm not saying that they are right. I'm not saying they are wrong. I'm not making a judgment call on what they're saying. I'm saying no one walks into a room and without saying anything or without doing anything, just suddenly were called racist.
But so is the person supposed to fight this by not saying or doing anything?
No.
Is that your prescription
I'm
for
saying
solving this
cancel culture
ordeal?
is no. I'm saying cancel culture exists. Cancel culture is wrong, but cancel
Okay.
culture. But the initial claim, the only thing I'm challenging is the initial claim that nothing has to happen. You just have to be called something. No, something has to happen, right or wrong. Something has to happen that people use
As to make false allegations
Sure, and
against you.
I agree, but that's still something. That's not nothing.
Yeah, but
That's my
you're
point.
focusing on what the person did instead of the false allegations is part of the problem because the person did nothing wrong.
I didn't say they did anything. I don't know. I don't know what's being missed here. I'm not saying they did anything wrong. I've said
Okay.
multiple times. I'm not saying they did anything wrong. I'm saying so. For let's try this. Let's try a little game.
Mhm.
So, say you were standing outside and you were throwing a rock in the air.
Mhm.
Okay, and you threw a rock in the air and it came down, it landed, you saw the rock landed, but then somewhere next to you, somebody claims you hit them with a rock.
Mhm.
Okay, their claim is basing it off the fact that you threw the rock.
Mhm. Yeah, they're
Is
false
the claim right?
allegation.
It's a false allegation, but you still threw a rock. What I'm saying is, you didn't just walk outside your house and somebody said, "Hey, you threw a rock at me." You were in the process of throwing a rock. It just didn't land where the person said you landed at. Do you get the difference?
Yeah, but it's a inconsequential difference though. Why even bring it up?
Well, because the initial argument was they don't even have to do anything and we're called racist. And I'm saying no, that's not true. That's the only thing I'm arguing is they don't have to do anything. Something has to be said to be misinterpreted.
You right. So basically you're saying just don't say anything and everything will be okay. You
Well,
won't
if
get
I
any
meant that, I
false
would have said that.
allegations aimed at you if you don't actually
No, no,
communicate
no.
with
If I
anyone.
meant that, I would have said that. I would have said don't say anything. I'm not making a claim like
Don't
that
know. Why are you even making this argument?
because the again that argument was just against the initial claim that you don't even have to do anything. That's all
Yes,
it
but
was.
do you understand my argument? Because not like doing things that are innocuous that any normal person does all the time, being mischaracterized as something dastardly is something that you can't avoid. And what you're saying is, yeah,
No,
but they did something.
what I'm saying is, as I said before,
You're saying
it
nobody
is
gets falsely accused unless they do something.
no. I'm saying it is very rare.
I don't. What the fuck?
I'm saying it's very rare that someone just gets fired just for doing nothing. I don't think it
Oh
even
my god.
happens.
You're basically making the well, maybe they really did do it.
That's
Maybe
okay.
James Damore really is a misogynist pig.
I mean, you're doing a lot of Nostradamus work right now. You are.
Well, what are you
Because
saying? I don't want to put words in your mouth, man.
well,
I don't.
you have this entire thing because for some reason you keep hearing me say the only thing, the only statement, because I agreed with everything else. The only statement I'm saying, and I challenged, was you don't even have to do anything. And I'm like, well, no, something has to happen in order for people to mischaracterize you. Does that mean that those people are right for mischaracterizing you? No. But something has to happen. That's the only challenge I made.
Yes, but
And
I
for
don't
some
understand
reason,
why you're high. How do you how is this helpful in helping someone not be falsely accused?
I didn't make that claim it was going to be helpful. Like the other
Okay.
things, the other arguments I made was because I literally agreed with you by saying Vosh was wrong by calling him that. The only argument I was making back was Sargon has a long, so Sargon's not a victim here. Sargon has a long history of mischaracterizing and lying about what other people have said in order to push narratives.
See, I would not follow Sargon if that was the case. Like, I would not. Like, mischaracterizing people. I've never seen him mischaracterize people. Who are you talking
I
about?
have. And well, I mean, like I said, I'll find, because there's multiple videos that leftists have posted have shown him giving an example of something, cutting it completely out of context, and then presenting it as something else. And people literally going through it and going, well, no, that's not what that person said.
All right. Let me see here. Dr. Cataclysm for $2 says, what area is being called an ethno-nationalist okay? Yeah. In what part of the United States is being called an ethno-nationalist okay?
I never said there was an area where being called ethno-nationalist was okay.
Okay, so it's not okay anywhere. Jacob Sanker for $5 says, I have a female friend who was threatened by a man at her work, and he was banned. He is now back because he called corporate and accused racism. Well, that's just kind of a comment, Jacob, but that's awful, obviously. Lord of the Nerds for $2 says, how does systemic racism cause surprise sex? Surprise sex means rape. I don't know how. I don't know how to answer that, Lord of the Nerds.
Well, we never got to the fourth part, undiagnosed mental health.
Okay.
And that's where, when you have a densely populated area of people who have severe issues, and not just, I'm not saying like mental health in a sense of just stuff that can be easily recognized, but I mean, there are people that have behavioral issues, serious behavioral issues that are just not being addressed.
Well, don't you think it's going to exacerbate your example of the history of black people being subjugated by white people? Don't you think that's going to exacerbate the surprise sex person?
Does history exacerbate? I mean,
resentment.
Does mentioning World War II lead to the rise of Nazis?
Well, but it's a much different claim. I mean, if the claim was that, you know, the World War II never ended and that there are systems of oppressions that the Nazis set up that still exist to this day and are designed to subjugate people, that's more closer to the claim than...
No, it's more close to the claim that the effects of a virtual genocide in Poland and many of the countries between Germany and the USSR during World War II led to multiple issues, ethnic issues in those areas. So conflicts have risen because of the actions of Nazis and the Soviet Union as they went through those areas.
Let me ask you a different question, because I think we probably both agree that the resentment is bad for anybody going forward, and that should probably do our best to tamp down that resentment. Is there a way that we can do that? Like, I understand you're making a claim here that we're just talking about the historical facts that might make people feel resentment towards another race. Is there a way that we can tell this history without making it resentment laden for so many people in our society now?
I don't know what you mean. Like, that's a weird question, because there's gonna be resentment, period. You can't stop resentment. But
well, the whole idea behind Christianity is to stop resentment. I mean, that's...
Well, yeah, but a lot of people aren't Christian, and a lot of Christians don't operate like that.
No, but I'm just saying I'm saying that the religions evolved to deal with things like an untenable level of resentment in society. That's one of the reasons why they've been so effective over time. And I'm just saying there is this like narrative technology of religion that's designed to help people deal with their resentment in positive ways. I don't necessarily think critical race theory is the kind of technology to help people deal with resentment in constructive ways.
Well, religion works both ways. So, yes, in a perfect world, religion would work like that. But we've traced religion thousands of years and understand that religion does not work that way. Um, so, I would argue that pushing religion is one of the bigger issues in the black community and should not be used as much because it is boosting the resentment.
So you think religion in the black community is adding to the resentment?
Yes,
Really?
definitely.
Interesting.
Because religion, especially when you get into the more radical interpretations of the religions, like heck, the Black Israelites.
Yeah, the Black Israelites. We're in total agreement there.
No, what I'm saying is that's an extreme version, but at least but at least you understand what I'm saying is how people use religion. Everyone doesn't view religion the same way.
The Black Israelites that religion is designed to boost resentment in the black community, like,
but it's a religion
to turn it up as high as possible. The only reason, and we're kind of going down a religion road that we don't need to go down, because the only reason that I brought it up was I was citing it as an example of this way that we develop narratives to deal with problems in society, like an overwhelming resentment between the black community and the white community. And I'm wondering if there's some way to deal with that resentment in a positive way. One of my critiques of CRT is I think critical race theory deals with it in probably the worst way imaginable.
But I mean, I'm still, what I'm noticing through this entire conversation is I'm explaining to you what CRT means. And I see, and every time I give you examples of what CRT is talking about, you do say, I agree that happened. I do agree that happened. I do agree that happened. But then we get to the end road, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, CRT is saying something completely different than what I actually said to you and what you already agreed to.
They're two separate arguments, and I haven't agreed to the second argument.
Which one haven't you agreed to? Like that's where I'm confused about.
My read is, go ahead.
Do you agree? And this will be yes or no. So once we get to a no, then maybe we can find out where the problem is. Do you agree that there was a white supremacist action that happened in the past that diminished black growth and development in the United States?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Slavery, Jim Crow, all those things. Yes. Those are historical facts.
Do you agree that 40 years is not enough time to rectify completely those variables in order to create, or do you agree that because that happened, there are large enough variables that would be shown in statistical differences between the races?
That not enough time has passed for them for basically racial equality to exist?
For not equality.
I don't know where we are on that path. I think we're a hell of a lot closer than we were during Jim Crow.
But do you think we're there? Do you think we are all of a sudden at a point where the generational differences are gone? Or do you think that there are still generational differences?
I honestly don't know the statistics, so I don't know. Yeah.
And see,
I don't know that there are poor whites. That's the thing. Like, everybody wants to point to the CEOs and the rich white people and say, look, whites are rich. There's a lot of poor white people. So.
I didn't wait. That's why I was very specific in saying that there are four different elements there. Yeah. I didn't just say that all white people are rich and all black people are poor. What I said was those decisions affect statistics, as in there will be far more wealthy whites than there will be wealthy blacks just because of the decisions that happened prior to either of us being born. That's just, I mean, I don't see where there's a challenge there.
Well, it's once you get once you get some level of racial equality, the idea is that the decisions have to be put on the actual community themselves. So the argument is, the black community has free will. They're taking their own, they're free to go down whatever path they choose to go down.
Then we get to the third yes or no question. Do you believe 40 years is enough time for 35 to 50 million people to migrate throughout the rest of the United States equal to whites?
It's impossible for me to answer that question. It's impossible for me.
And
well, like, don't you think circumstance has to do with that? Like,
sure,
40 years is a long time. I mean, it depends upon what's happened in that 40 years. What is 40 years is the civil rights, right? Because civil rights was in 1968, correct?
Well, I'm basing it off of the 1964. Well, actually, no, I'm basing it off of the 70s because that's where many of the laws were implemented.
Okay.
Like, even though the laws were passed, the laws started really becoming implemented and followed.
So it's actually 50 years. And you're saying that in 50 years, that's not enough time for the black community to catch up with the white community and have equal numbers. Well, I don't know the numbers. You probably know the numbers better than me. So
okay. And that's all CRT is saying. Right now, CRT is arguing.
That's where I disagree with you.
CRT is arguing that even though no one is saying that individually, no individual can grow, the expectations of 35 to 50 million people to all of a sudden not have a statistical difference from the group of people who have both advantaged and not advantaged, a wide gap of people who have greatly advantaged and not advantaged, to be able to catch up to that is ridiculous to expect. There's going to be a gap there. There's always going to be a gap there for right now. Yeah. And that's all CRT is saying.
Well, you're also saying that the responsibility of that gap you're placing on the white community.
No. I answered, it depends on how long you're willing to wait. If you're willing to, if you want this to, and I keep saying this,
it could be an eternity if nobody's actually going to work at it, though.
Yeah, but nobody's saying nobody's actually working at it. I mean, I'm lost on how you think that because there's a statistical disadvantage, that means nobody is moving. I don't know where you're making. How did you make that leap? I need your.
What is the statistical disadvantage? I didn't.
As in, like, blacks only own, I think, 3%. No, I think it's less than 3% of all obtainable land in the United States. That's a statistical difference, a severe statistical difference.
Right.
You can't expect that to be solved in 50 years.
And they're locked out of the market because they don't have the resources and they can't get the jobs to get the resources.
I'm not saying they can't. It's just far more difficult. Not more difficult, but yeah, far more difficult just because there are multiple things in there that create difficulties for the black community. I don't want to say can't. Can't is ridiculous. But they're just
I think critical race theory is one of those things. That's where I disagree with you, I believe.
And I don't see how, but okay.
Lord of the Nerds for $2 says, what's Lozar's position on personal agency / free will?
Everyone has personal agency and free will, but that doesn't mean that, as I keep saying over and over again, that doesn't mean that generational disparities don't create statistical differences. Like,
go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh no, I'm done. I'm done.
Genetic disposition for $5 says, my neighbors have been threatening to shoot each other for a month now over building a fence. I live way out in the country. Well, I hope they, as someone who's argued with my neighbor about our lot line, I I sympathize and hope that it doesn't come down to shots being fired. Jay for $5 says, Adam, look up the books Tim Wise has made. Really concerning. Yeah, I wrote down Tim Wise. I don't think I've read anything by Tim Wise.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and again, I am not going to back everything everybody writes. And why? Actually, that was a question I have for you.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that this is the only subject where, in order to read somebody's work, you have to completely agree with everything that person says? Any other subject, people are able to go, okay, this person is a leader in their field, and most of the stuff is incredible, but they also wrote this 1 or 2 lines in his book that is completely off-putting. But I can separate that from the rest of the work. Why is CRT the only one where people can cut through 500 pages of research, find one little sentence, and be like, oh my gosh, they wrote this one sentence. This is the whole thing that they are. Why is that the only field that seems to happen like that?
As someone who's read a lot of MMT, modern monetary theory, I can tell you for a fact that that's not the only situation where people do that. So Jay for $5 says, Adam, look up. Oh, I already read that one. Ivar and Getters for $5 says, these kind of arguments make it seem like they think being black is a disability. Check out Sargon's Rich Kids Love Social Justice. I'm POC, by the way. Oh, that's funny. I didn't know that. Ivar and Getters has been with the channel for a long time. So anyway, you don't believe being black is a disability, correct?
No.
Yeah. Lozar is black. I believe you're black, correct?
Yeah, I'm black.
Anonymous Coward for $10 says, look at the pro CRT versus anti CRT talk on Brittany King's channel. Pro CRTers claim James Lindsay doesn't understand CRT, and D'Angelo and Kendi are not CRT advocates. If CRT is just a lens, it got co-opted.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at and I love saying this because we keep saying this over and over again. It's like linking child psychology to Dr. Phil.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Phil has said and done some of the most egregious things that child psychology is like. That's him speaking on his own. He doesn't speak for child psychology. It's the same with D'Angelo and Kendi. There are certain things that people are like, they're on their own saying that.
Derek Drummond for $2 says, what's the overall point here? Well, just to basically try to have a conversation about this stuff. Lozar has criticized me on Twitter forever. He has to have a conversation with me, and I accepted just because it seems my interactions with you on Twitter, you seem to come at me hard and misinterpret what I'm saying. And then once I clarify, we tend to agree. So
I'm lost on when I've came at you hard. I've laughed at a couple of things you said. I think the only time I ever came at you hard was your no bullshit stance. I think that's the only time.
What was my stance there? I don't even remember.
It was, again, your denial of the stuff no bullshit did. And that stream had to be one of the weirdest defense. Now, granted, after a while, Sitch was able to pull you over and be like, you do see what he's saying.
Well, I had another conversation with him on my channel as well. So, I mean,
yeah,
hopefully everything's crystal clear. I don't like to accuse people willy-nilly of the kinds of things that the left and particularly the commentary community on YouTube is willing to accuse people of, because I don't want to do tangible damage to them. I guess your claim is that like he's no bullshit is unforgivable and that he should be deplatformed, I guess.
Not that he's and I want you to understand this. I've never claimed anyone should be deplatformed.
Okay, good.
But I did say that no bullshit did go a lot out of his way to lie about the things that he did.
Yeah.
Like he explicitly lied about claiming that he was basically an alt-right gateway.
Mm-hmm.
Where there is a video of him saying I'm an alt-right gateway. Like those were the things where I'm like, he is blatantly lying to you. That's the only time I came at you, because I'm like, what are you doing right now? Everything else has been like, I just disagree with what you're saying.
let's continue. We have a time constraint. We can't. I would love to get sidetracked on all this stuff. Lord of the Nerds for $2. The ghost of white supremacy haunts this poor soul. Is that true? There's a ghost of. Okay. Chris Jones for $5 says the Japanese had all their property and homes taken from them in the 40s with no recourse. Why are Japanese Americans better off now materially than whites? That's a great question.
Well, I want him to Google it because there is no such thing, or that no recourse line was a lie. There was definitely recourse for that.
Did they get their property back? No,
but they received a large lump sum of money and I think a couple of advantageous laws. I got to look it back up again, but there was a lot of recourse for the internment camps.
Jay for $2 says huge bias, doesn't challenge his own ideas. Derek Drummond for $2 says, so what's the solution?
I mean, I keep saying it depends on how fast you want it done.
That's kind of the question I was asking. Contrast for $2 for $2 Aussie dollars says, so what about Koreans?
Which Koreans?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's why that's the funniest thing about these questions. A lot of them is somebody looked at a statistic of Koreans as a whole, which means the people that came with 15 cents in the dream, along with business owners, sons and daughters, and people that came for the schooling and everything else that were actually very, very wealthy, had a lot of access to resources. And you're mixing them together with a group of people that don't have that separation.
Have you read any Thomas Sowell? I'm curious if you have a take on Thomas Sowell.
There's a reason why Thomas Sowell is very rarely challenged on his arguments about the Black community. Mm-hmm. A lot of the stuff he says about Blacks, he usually says by himself for a very obvious reason.
What is? Make it obvious for me. I don't know what you're talking about.
Thomas Sowell likes to make arguments based off of initial observation, but he doesn't like to be challenged on why certain things are the way it is. Like when you asked me about culture, mm-hmm. and I said, well, culture is a response to something. Thomas Sowell will talk about the culture, but Thomas Sowell will not talk about what the culture is a response to.
So what are you saying?
He's surface level. He gives surface level answers to problems that are deeper.
So you're saying Thomas Sowell wants to blame the Black community for their own problems, and you're saying it's a response to the white community?
No, I'm saying Thomas Sowell wants to just talk about what he wants to talk about the culture, but doesn't want to talk about, like I said before, he wants to talk about the culture, but doesn't want to talk about why the culture is the way it is. Mm-hmm. So gotcha. It's kind of the same as looking at the foundation of a house, seeing a crack and saying, hey, there's a crack in the foundation, but not wondering why the crack exists.
Right. Wheeler for Whale Ears for $10 says God drove Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden and denied humanity access to paradise, robbing us of opportunities to better ourselves. We must rebel against God to reclaim power. Hell yeah. I want that.
You just gave the explanation for the Tower of Babel.
Is it? Trying to get, trying to build to God. Jedi Bob 13 for $5 says property rights are more important and race? Maybe than race?
Than race? Yeah. And that's what I was saying. Like property rights is not racist, mm-hmm. but property rights protect the racist decisions. Mm-hmm. That was my entire point. I can't kick somebody off their land, even if I do have an argument to the land.
Is buying property a goal of people in the Black community? I mean, obviously, I'm assuming you grew up in the Black community.
Yes. I've grown up in multiple communities. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's always been a goal of the Black community. Unfortunately, it's just one of those things where Blacks don't really know how to know how to navigate a lot of that and have a lot other issues that they have to address before even trying to buy a home or moving out.
Yeah. Gartham for $10 says the fact that there are inherent negative factors is true of every group individual. Suffering and tragedy is common amongst all and perceived in an infinite amount of ways through one's will.
Mm-hmm. And statistics will always show those variables, which is my point.
There's one clip that I have, and man, I should memorize this clip. It's from the book Identity. I can't remember the name of the author, but he talks about the argument over narratives and philosophy versus material conditions, and how material conditions and narratives play off one another, because narratives can influence how you view your material conditions, and material conditions can structure how you create narratives. Mm-hmm. So it's really an interesting exercise to try to figure out which one is driving the ship. I think about that clip a lot. Bleach Martini for $5 says Lozar One's position conflates initial cause with sustaining conditions. White supremacy, as he describes it, is not an ongoing process, but a transient event. Yeah, that's the problem that I have. I agree with you on the transient event, but I believe critical race theory is making the argument that those conditions of Jim Crow were transmogrified into a hidden system of oppression that's just as bad as Jim Crow.
I have explained.
Right, you disagree.
Their actual argument.
Yeah, we don't need it. Soupy Comics for $5 says, hypothetically speaking, what evidence would Lozar need to see to be convinced that invisible white supremacy is not holding down black people? Well, he would
saying invisible white supremacy is holding down white people.
Yeah, he would disagree that invisible white supremacy is a thing. You don't believe that, right? It seems
I don't even know what invisible white supremacy is to even say, hey, invisible white supremacy.
He's making the argument that I'm mischaracterizing CRT, critical race theory, as invisible white supremacy. So he doesn't believe that exists. Jay for $5 says, yeah, you're looking for these reasons why to find a way to solve it, which is how we get to these stupid answers. Jay,
that's what I said. Like, I literally said, if you're trying to solve something like this in 20 some odd years, you're going to get incredibly over the top, ridiculous answers, because it's not something to be solved in 20 years.
How close are we?
In 20 years.
How close are we? How economically depressed is the black community compared to the white community? Do you know that?
Economically depressed.
I mean, it's weird for me because I grew up in kind of a suburban neighborhood, and there were blacks that went to our school. Like, a black guy lived across the street and owned his house, and this was like 100 years ago. So
sure, but like I said, it depends on what field we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So if we're talking about black people having the ability to move into rural and suburban areas, I mean, that should happen.
Yeah, forever ago. I know. I'm ancient.
Soon. I mean, that should be. I mean, that's happening now. But if we are talking about changing 3% of all owned, less than 3% of all owned land into a percentage proportionate to African Americans gaining self-determination, that's way down the line. And by self-determination, I mean blacks not having to rely, at least at one stage of their movement, on white people. Right now, we have to rely on you. We have no coal plants. We have no steel plants. We're steel.
It's so weird that you say that.
We don't have, or not steal plants, but like
I would just
mines or anything like that.
I would never conceptualize that white people control the steel plants and
No,
that
no, no. I'm saying
I'm
we don't
lucky because
have. No, no. What I'm saying is we don't have the, like, say tomorrow, and I'm not saying
Mhm,
this is something that's going to happen. I'm just saying, just hypothetically,
mhm.
say tomorrow, white people said, okay, we'll stick to our kind. We'll only work in our, or we'll only work in our areas. We'll only work together. We'll never work with any other group. And black people go, sure, we don't have the resources to sustain ourselves. Just fact.
Right.
Now
But
that's what I mean. For in order to have self determination, we don't have the resources for that. That's going to happen way down the line.
is that something that black community desires?
Self determination,
No, segregation.
segregation, no. Self determination, yes. The
Right.
ability to be able to have access to every single field, black people would, yes, we want to be able to have that because it's the only way to have political, economic, and social equality.
What fields do blacks not have access to?
Well, I've just gave the statistic that we only own 3% of all land, and I'm
But
being
what
very
does that have to
generous.
do with what does that have to do with the fields though? Like if a black person wanted to study anything, wouldn't they have the ability to study anything?
Sure, but
When
that
they
has,
I
like,
mean,
if I wanted to study mining coal, that doesn't automatically mean I own a an area to be able to uh mine and harvest coal. That just means I know how to do it.
John McWhorter, one of his problems with this critical race theory stuff is he feels like being black has given him more opportunities than being white would have given him because of he grew up in this time when affirmative action was heavy. I mean,
Sure.
right now they're it just seems like if a black person wanted to go into any sort of study, they could. Am I wrong about that?
I don't know what that's countering. Like, you're probably not wrong, but I don't know what is that challenging that
Well,
I'm saying.
I'm just saying, like, I don't necessarily know what argument you're making about, like,
I'm arguing
if I
self
wanted this,
determination.
right? But what was the example you said about like coal? Like, I
Like,
don't
yeah,
know, I
no
don't know.
matter how much schooling I have, or no matter how much money I have,
Mhm.
I can't force someone to give me a coal mine.
That's crazy. Neither can I. I mean,
Well, sure, but what I'm saying is,
that's
no, no,
not a
no,
race thing. That's a
but
class
I
thing.
gave the argument that if we are depending on what we are talking about, if we are talking about just black people becoming educated and just black people moving into rural and suburban communities, if that's the only goal you have, then over time that's going to happen. But
This
if the
is
goal is what a lot of people are saying, self determination, that is something that's going to happen decades, centuries down the line.
all right. We can't argue anymore. I have like a hard out in 15 minutes, and we're just like I have a million super chats to read.
Okay,
It's
yeah,
like
let's get, yeah.
it's insane. No more super chats, guys. Oh my god! And I think I lost my place here. Holy shit!
Oh,
Oh wait, Gartham for $10 says the fact that there are inherent negative factors is true of every group individual suffering the tragedy is common almost all the perceived is an infinite amount of ways though through one's will. My god. Hopefully
okay.
is that the one that I just read?
Yeah,
Oh, okay. Well, Bleach Martini for $5. Loser one position conflates initial. Oh,
read that.
okay. I read that. Soupy Comics. Oh my god. Soupy Comics for $5 says, hypothetically speaking, what evidence would loser? Oh,
You
I
said
think
you
you
read
read
that.
that one, Jay. Oh my god. Yeah, you're. Jay for $5. Yeah, you're looking for these reasons why to find a way to solve it. Oh, I think I read that one.
Mhm.
Derek Drummond for $5 says, this is pretty stupid and triggering. Finally, a new super chat. Can we talk about 16-year-olds voting instead? No, we can't. Ergo Games for $5 says, I was excited that I could catch this live this week, but this discussion is too much. This tip is because I like your content otherwise. Okay. Thank you. Utter Nonsense for $5 says, Lozar, could you explain Jewish success across multiple countries despite the oppression they faced for thousands of years in relation to black people? Yeah, just do it quick, Lozar.
So what country, what area, what are we talking about? Because again, there is a different, there's no way for me to be able to give that an answer in a short amount of time.
Red Wall 1521 for $10 says, if anyone is math smart, fixing inequality is either like using an exponent logic, log x, getting closer to a line slowly over time, or by applying a cosine curve crossing the equality line. Thank you for the $10. I have no idea what you're saying.
I get it.
And do you?
He's pretty much saying the same exact thing I'm saying.
Michael Gallup for $4.99 says, systemic racism SR in the past caused the gaps, but now the negative mentalities caused by systemic racism is now what holds back blacks.
And I mean, talk about something that you really can't measure. We keep going.
Lord of the Nerds for $5 says, starts with psychology, DMG, because crime, complains about my feelings, collective guilt. Oh my God, why you take it personally? Jokes. Dude's a joke. Lord of the Nerds, I don't think really respects many of the arguments you've made, but he's critical of me as well. Gartham for $10 says, even though critical race theory is inherently information, people can create logics of ought with CRT through I ought to this, but this information says this, therefore I ought to this. Also wrench at him. Gartham, I don't have time to give you a wrench right now, but I'll get you next time. Looks like Sitch is in the chat with the Sitch and Adams show. What's up, Sitch? But you understand the argument that Gartham is making, right? That there are oughts that's the argument that I've made this entire stream. So thank you for noticing, Gartham. Yes, I am saying that if you produce a narrative that demoralizes people, those demoralized people will turn to less productive ways to spend their time than to build communities. Derek Drummond for $5 says, screw what we want. What is the best solution? Lozar, do you have the best solution?
I mean, I keep saying it depends on. It
sounds like it's a reparations type situation.
Well, no, if you want it rapidly, you're going to have to do something rapidly. If you want it incremental, you're going to have to just wait.
But that's reparations. Are you for reparations?
If you want something to happen rapidly, that's the only way for it to happen. Is a large transfer of resources from one area to another. That's how rapid growth happens in a country.
Backer the Hacker for £5 says 1350 is a response given to the BLM argument that cops are racist because they have more interactions with blacks. They racialized it. Okay, so he's saying that you're the one that racialized that statistic,
even though it was literally on. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I've heard white nationalists make that argument as well. So
long before now. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Backer the Hacker for £5. DOJ did not racialize it either. They collected stats on all demographics, even not even just racial. Yes. Backer the Hacker.
They categorized it as racial. That's the okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess obviously. The Backer the Hacker for £5 says this guy is trying to bait and switch Adam, making personal analogies and then calling Adam emotional because Adam's emotions aren't doing what he wants them to.
I don't.
I'm famously easily triggered, so
Oh, good Lord.
but I'm
Okay.
not really triggered, but that whole thing that you laid out is just, I could see that infuriating people, and I don't think it's productive. Back of the hacker for another £5. Thank you very much. Says 4, the whole basis of his argument is BS and invalidated by every immigrant group who manages to climb higher in one generation than closet family in 3.
Unless he's arguing that every single immigrant group only shows up with 15 cents in a dream, he's lying.
If every
15, yeah, unless he's arguing that
right.
Every single immigrant group does not have resources from the areas that they're coming from. Every single group does not have anyone with resources as they're transferring over to the United States.
Right.
That's the only way he has an argument.
Utter nonsense for $2 says, a student at my uni got fired for rumors of voting Republican. Holy shit. Oh, that's awful. Redwall 1521 for $10 says, no loser. I'm saying commies don't get fired because the people who brigade a social media aren't right wingers. Also, wouldn't you say commies do something to get labeled as a commie?
Yeah.
Okay. Contrast for $2 Aussie says, mate, no one is saying they get canceled in a vacuum. True.
That's the okay. Go ahead.
Back of the hacker for £2 says, A team, God teams, slays queens, and reigns supreme. Disavow, unless of course you mean like aristocracy queens, which definitely, of course, the let them eat cake crowd, I'm definitely against. Diehard Doogie for $10 says, what support can a white person give to existing institutions, police, property, rule of law, marriage, etc., without being considered being an individual that upholds white supremacy? That's a good question. Do you have a quick answer?
I don't think the claim is any individual upholds white supremacy. The claim is that white supremacy works in a system where white supremacy has already created something. So again, as I'm saying, if you got kicked off of land and you come back to that land and somebody else already owns it, the fact that you got kicked off from white supremacy and the fact that you cannot take that land back because there's property rights means that those property rights is protecting a white supremacist decision, even though the property rights are not white supremacists.
Man, but okay, I can't. I have to move on. Whale Ears for $5 says, too many analogies are being tortured under your watch, Adam. This is rough. Put the foot down. Well, I'm not having this conversation to put the foot down. So you guys can put the foot down in the comments below. I will read your comments and your responses. Draznook for $5 says, so Lozar's argument is, if a woman gets assaulted but she was wearing revealing clothing, then she was not assaulted for no reason, I think is what he means to say. Yeah, the whole they had it coming argument is kind of equated on the social media thing. Well, you are basically saying that the person did something.
No, I'm not. I'm saying, let's just keep going.
Yeah, Lord of the Nerds for $2 says, he's right. You have to exist to be accused. Lol. Soupy Comics for $2 says, did you see what she was wearing? Lozar 2021. Yeah, this is the common retort to the cancel culture argument that you're making. So
yeah.
Time Rift for $10. Yes, Adam, there is a way to reduce resentment. As a person who happens to be black, I find not being completely wrapped up in your race is a way to move past it. Obviously, anything racial is a negative. So Time Rift is also black and thinks we should evidently he buys into the
ignore
colorblind
history.
society argument.
That's fine. I mean, yeah, and I mean, if the only way you can survive is to ignore history completely, then sure. If you're that triggered by history, then be triggered by history.
Mm-hmm. I would love to respond, but I have to move on. Render Under Caesar for $4.99 says, "What the hell is psychologically disenfranchisement?" I believe that's being cast out of society, like feeling that you don't have a place in society. Am I close?
Close. Yeah.
Okay. Redwall 1521 for $20. Thank you so much. That's so generous of you. CRT does not just include the history, it includes the process and revolutionary and contradictory points. See store cashier example. If you only want to attribute CRT to systemic racism, you need to read the source material. So
hey, James Lindsay, that's not what that meant.
Ascendate Media? Ascendant Media? I'm so bad at this. For $20. Thank you so much. Sorry, I probably murdered that name. An alternative would be something similar to Tolkien's meta narratives. The world is tainted and the odds are overwhelming. However, what you do with the time given to you is where purpose is derived. It isn't describing CRT. Yeah, I agree with that. I totally agree with that. That's why I think Jordan Peterson is helpful to people. Back of the Hacker for £5 says, also this whole farming, something happened to diminish Black achievement is wrong, dumb. Poverty is the natural state. We have worked to boost BLK people. Black people, I guess. We have worked to boost Black people. Yeah, that was the whole idea behind affirmative action. We've been working at this for a long time. You disagree?
I mean, that's not what affirmative action is, but that's a completely different conversation.
Okay. I think I'm pretty close here, and I have a heart, like I'm making headway here. Redwall 1521 for $5 says, to piggyback off of my last one, CRT defines action that we disagree with. It'll cause a denigration of society and motivation. That's why we disagree.
Yep. Like I keep saying, if history makes you think like that, then please don't read a history book.
JJ Checker for $5. I don't know if it was constructive or not, but I appreciate you doing this exercise. It's always nice hearing you hash it out with the crazies. Go A-team. How do you like that? JJ Checker thinks you're crazy, Lozar.
That's fine.
I might have you back to talk about this again. I mean, if you're interested, I feel like there's like, I would like to prepare like a defense, but Redwall 1521. Geez, you're just showering me with money, man. For $10 says, additionally, whether or not CRT got co-opted, what the co-opted CRT teaches is being taught in schools, companies, etc. Openly criticize that as much as you criticize us first, and then we'll agree. Yeah. So he's just saying.
Can you find an example of curriculum where it teaches CRT to K through 12?
I would have to look for that. So perhaps.
And curriculum, not somebody just going off and saying what they think something is, just the curriculum actually inserting CRT.
Yeah, leave me that in the comments below, and I'll definitely share it. Render Under Caesar for $10 says, this argument of white supremacy is idiotic. He's describing exactly what we all criticize CRT for, some amorphous deity-like omniscient thing. He's gaslighting us. Kelsey Glasick for $5 says, Lozar, how does people having mixed ancestry affect your argument? What if you are part white?
I'm actually like 30-something% white. But
Okay.
that, I mean, I don't know what she's asking. Or is she saying like just because somebody's mixed race, that means that the DOJ doesn't separate statistics by race?
Well, I think it's more along the lines of the metaphor you're making. You're hitting your microphone a lot,
Sorry.
Lozar. So
No,
Whale Ears for $5 says CRT is Marxist, so it's no surprise that it evades definitions and that none of its adherents have read anything about it. Lord of the Nerds for $5 says this dude never read Saul. Saul doesn't make a cultural argument without citing a million historical events. This dude hasn't read Derek Bell. Have you read Derek Bell?
I've read a bit of Derek Bell. I haven't read a lot of them, but I've definitely read a ton of Saul. And no, he really doesn't. He'll make anecdotal arguments, but he won't do the whys into why the culture itself exists.
The Smoking Jacket for $5. Culture is not a response to something. It is echoes of the past. Read Albert Murray and Alistair McIntyre. Alan Powell for $5 says, what if the richest people said we're gonna go our own way? We could not be self-sufficient. Therefore, society should own the coal mines. Yeah, that's a communist argument right there.
That's not the argument I made, but okay.
Daniel Irish for $5. Hi, Adam. Just got here. Lozar 1 is a clown. I think Daniel Irish, I think we argue with on Twitter quite often. So Al Washburn for $5. I'm an hour behind live, but I wish I could get in on the discussion because Lozar is willing to actually discuss. Kudos to him, even if I don't agree. If you want to debate other people, Lozar, I'm happy to host.
Sure.
Other people definitely might be interested in arguing the finer points. I'm working on a comic like 10 hours a day. I don't have a lot of time to do research on this stuff. So, but I get a lot of research because Sitch spends all day Saturday reading up on whatever topic we're discussing on Sunday. And then I learn it from him on Sunday. So Jay for $2, last super chat. Thank God. Woo, we made it. And I'm only 2 minutes late. Triggered. Sounds like projection. Do you want to say anything? Like, I give you 1 minute for a closing statement before I absolutely have to go.
Oh no. I mean, I pretty much saw this going the way it went. I mean, a lot of information came out where you did kind of understand what I was saying, but there are certain things where I think I'm gonna have to do a different approach.
We can try again. This was definitely, I hope, entertaining, even though some people seem to be triggered by it. Leave us your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single comment, and obviously, Lozar can read the comments too. He's on Twitter. Daniel Irish for $5 says, "I don't argue with you, Adam. Just Sitch. A team for life." That's right. So we'll see you guys all next Thursday, same time, same place. I'll probably do another stream on Saturday morning. People seem to like that, and I think I got close to 500 live viewers, or 400 live viewers. So thank you so much. We'll see you next Thursday, maybe Saturday morning. Take care. Thanks for playing along, Lozar, and bye-bye.
See you later.